All right. Next, we got Rich. Complexity is a human construct. Using it as a way of viewing the world is limiting. All right, let's hear from you. Rich, you're live on air. How's it going?
Hello, how you two doing today?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Hit us with it.
So, I first of all, I'm an atheist. Been an atheist for forever, but in the arguments that I hear about the complexity of the world and the arguments about creationism and all that, and we use these terms complexity, but that's just a human construct. It is within the universe and in nature and physics and chemistry. Things happen just because they happen. Our not understanding it or our inability to put it together is what complexity is. But that doesn't make it magical. It's human-centric, and I guess we have no other way to be because that's who we are. We're human. We're going to see things from our perspective. But I always use the argument, 1 + 1 is the most complex concept to a 1-year-old. But when you're 7, it's not anymore. So my point is that I wonder if there's a way of couching the arguments against creationism to just basically minimize that whole conversation about complexity, because I think it's almost a misnomer. I don't know. It's something that I've been thinking on and off over the years as I hear the arguments, and I'm just. Do you get what I'm saying?
Kelley, do you want to?
Yeah, I do. The problem that I'm seeing is like, all right, let's use your example of creationism versus evolution, the opposite of it, right? Creationism relies on, oh, it's so complex, God had to do it. But then when you look at evolution, it's pretty damn complex, right? So all you're doing really is you're replacing this complexity with more complexity. And to the people who believe in creationism, the complexity of evolution doesn't seem reasonable or attainable, and vice versa, right? So again, and you mentioned a human-centric perspective. We also have to remember that there's like an atheist-centric perspective and a theist-centric perspective that aren't lining up either. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, but I think you sort of missed. I'm not sure if you're getting the question I'm asking, because
I thought you were looking for an easy. I thought you were looking for an easy answer to counter the complexity argument, and my point basically, Go ahead.
I was about to say complexity should not even be part of the argument, because it's so human-centric. It doesn't matter if it's atheist-centric or theist-centric. In the end, it is our limitations of understanding.
That's not how I define complex. So maybe that's the difference that we're with the communication problem we're having here.
Yeah. So, Rich, when you say complexity, what is the definition? Give us your personal definition of complexity so that we can better address your question.
Oh, okay. Let me think. You just asked a tough question, Sydney.
Did I ask a complex question by chance?
Yeah. It is. I guess it is a series of events, a process that has more steps or more things that have to be accounted for. Maybe that's a good. So within that statement, all of that is human limitation. Mm-hmm. But my argument is that within the universe,
if there's a process that takes 100 steps, right? That to me would be a very complex process. It takes 100 steps. And every one of them has to be the same. Now that could happen without a human viewing it. And that's why when you say complexity is a human concept, I don't think that that's true. I think complexity is complexity, and humans have invented a word to describe something that we already see in nature.
But my point is, even in the concept of complex, when does it become complex? My point is, within the universe, none of this is complex. It all just happens. You just have a set of steps that happen. If you give a certain set of parameters, this happens.
So
the limitation of humanity is that the number of parameters or the number of steps become complex to us, but within the universe, it isn't that's why it's so tough for me to explain it, because it's so.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. That this process that took 100 steps, it just happens in nature. Nature doesn't have to think about it. It's not complex to nature, right? But what I'm saying is that if something took one step, it would, that'd be an easy thing. If it took 100 steps, that would be a complex thing. Now, I understand that it's my interpretation, right? And we have invented the word complex for something that takes multiple steps, has multiple factors to make it work. And that's why it's complex, because it takes a lot of things all together to make it work. It has nothing to do with our perception of it. It still takes a whole bunch of things to make it work.
I think also the word complex is relative, right? So, for example, Kelley is a geologist. I think the study of rocks is hard, no pun intended, and complex, and I would not begin to know where to start. Meanwhile, Kelley would probably laugh and be able to identify things, figure them out. Like, to him, it is the easiest thing in the world. To me, it seems very, very complex. It seems like a lot of work. Now, that doesn't mean that I think everyone should agree with me. That doesn't mean that I'm looking around, and I think I'm getting what you're trying to say here. I'm not telling everyone his job is hard. His job's hard. It's hard for him. It's hard for me. It's hard for you. It's hard for all of us. And I think what you're saying is they're trying to take an idea that's complex for them and tell everyone that it is so complex, it's beyond understanding, it's beyond wrapping your brain around, when to someone like you, it's really not. And if I'm getting this correctly, you're saying that complexity, even though it's relative, is not something you can decide for other people. So I love public speaking.
Yes.
I'm a public speaker. I love debating. It's my favorite thing to do, like getting on these call-in shows and talking to people. For some other people, that is such a complex thought process that they're like, I'm never ever going to try that. That just seems like a lot of work, a lot of like too complex for me. They're not saying it's also complex for Sydney. It's also complex for Kelley. It's also complex for Rich. And what you're saying is people should stop telling me that I don't understand it because it's complex. When I understand it just fine, it might be complex for them, but I wish they would stop saying that it's too hard for anyone to understand.
Go ahead,
one
Kelley,
of the ways you keep using complexity too, it seems like, is that there's parts of it we just don't understand, right? And that's what's tripping me up, because I can understand, like, how going back to geology, how a pegmatite forms, and it's a very complex process, but I can still understand every single step of that complex process.
Right. Did I get that right, Rich? Did I kind of decipher what you're saying correctly?
Yeah, but within that, you're right. And within that conversation, how do we go about negating some of these arguments of, well, it's just so complex, it just couldn't happen? Because the reality is, it doesn't matter if it's one step or 2 billion steps to nature. Nature doesn't think about complexity. Nature doesn't. It's just a series of physical, chemical steps that happen.
What I would say is,
every time you start out with,
well, what I would say is, if somebody says that, if, say, like a theist says, it is just so many, it is so crazy complex, how can you possibly even know, as an atheist or as somebody who doesn't believe in God, where this all comes from? My response is usually, why is the only other answer God? If it's so complex, if it's so much work, if there's so many steps involved that it can't possibly be known to man on a scientific level, why is the only other option God? Why are those the only two options?
And to your point, I think, and this conversation can go down a rabbit hole, but to your point, this is where the human-centric thinking comes. We put ourselves in this position of preeminence, whatever, because of just we're at awe from our level. And then once we go past our level, it becomes, i.e., superhuman or God or whatever.
When it really shouldn't.
The reality is just that we just, the reality is we just don't know. We don't understand it.
That right there is your answer. That right there is how you respond to that. You say, no, it's not magical just because we don't know it. We don't know it because we don't know it yet. We're looking into it. We're researching. That's what science is for. That's why there are some people that are scientists and some people that aren't. That right there would be your answer. It doesn't go anything that I don't understand, therefore is God. It goes, no, I don't know it right now. Just like I didn't know 1 + 1 when I was a baby. Just like I didn't know, high level math when I was in high school, despite the number of hours I spent in tutoring. It's not God. The answer to that is not just automatically God. If you don't understand, therefore it's God. What you just said would be your answer. It's like, no, we're just figuring it out.
Yeah. And it doesn't make it so great just because we don't know it.
Right.
The fact is, all these processes exist regardless if we know them or not.
Yeah.
So again, this is our failings as human beings to perceive what's going on. And that's the thing that we have to figure out, we have to admit. And I think
I wouldn't say it's a
that,
failing, though.
Like
I think that's where we disagree. I wouldn't say that's a failing because we're working on a daily basis to figure out things like where did we come from, the origin of the species, all that stuff. I think it's not a failing. It's just we're still working on it. You're not a failure because you've never had a driver's license, right? You're not a failure because you've never done something or tried something or figured something out. That doesn't make you a failure. If you haven't seen it or heard it yet,
Yeah, and to your point, that's the word failure is just the word I use rhetorically, but it's not a failure. It is just our limitations until we reach that point of understanding. So
exactly,
it's not about failing, or it's just the bottom line is that we just don't know, and the fact that we don't know doesn't mean that it's not happening. Yeah,
and that also doesn't mean that it's
like
God.
That's right. Until, like, when germs were killing people, when people were getting sepsis and all that, and we didn't understand it, didn't mean that it didn't exist or wasn't there. It was just happening all the time. And these things just happen all the time. And until we get that understanding, it doesn't make it God. It doesn't make it so magical.
Yeah, exactly. I would just say we're still figuring it out. We don't know yet. The answers don't have to be we either know it right now or it's God. That's ridiculous. We're figuring it out. We're still resolving the matter.
And we're not the end all. Part of that argument is that I think that is sort of almost a narcissistic view of the universe. We're the end all, and that's on a psychological level. I think about that sometimes.
Yeah,
and Does that make sense what I just said?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to kind of break down to the final core of what it was you were getting at, because I understand what you're saying now. My response would be, I don't think the only two options are knowing it right now, having it pre-installed like iOS in my brain when I'm born, versus God. It's we are alive, humans figure things out, we find things out, we invent things all the time. King Henry VIII didn't fail at inventing the iPhone. He didn't try. That's, if we considered anyone who never did something in their lifetime to have failed at that thing, well, shit, I'm the biggest failure because there's a lot of things I've never done because I've never tried. But to say that the only other option is, well, if you don't know it right now, must be God, that is also a just real far reaching. There's a million steps in between those two things.
It's such a myopic view of everything. It's just so it's so short-sighted.
Yeah. But I think also it's helpful if when you no longer consider it failure, I don't think it will make you feel as enraged as you felt when you first called in about it. I don't think it'll make you as mad when you don't feel like you're being called a failure because you don't know something. And maybe it's just the New York accent.
I don't think Honestly, I don't think. Honestly, I never thought of it as a failure. That was just a rhetorical word
Okay.
using
Well, good.
to try to
Good.
explain it at that moment. I never
no,
think of it as failure.
Good. Well, Rich, it's been really fantastic talking to you. I'm glad we were able to
Mhm.
kind of get to the root of the conversation. Thank you so much for calling in. We really enjoyed talking to you.